Atlantic Ocean doesn't give up its dead, it just changes them. Elias Vance thought he could handle the isolation of Needle Rock Lighthouse, but he was wrong. When the fog finally clears, the tower will be silent, the logbook overturned, and the only entry written in the center will be a promise kept to the deed. The last Lightkeeper of Needle Rock. The Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Maine is not like other oceans. It doesn't sparkle, it broods. And standing sentinel over the jagged teeth of Needle Rock isn't a lighthouse so much as it is a tombstone that happens to have a lamp on top. In 1972, that lamp was tended by Elias Vance. Elias was a man carved from the same granite as the island he lived on. Silent, solitary, and unshakable. He preferred the company of gulls to men, and the roar of the gale to idle chatter. He had been at Needle Rock for 20 years. He knew the groan of the iron staircase, the specific pitch of the wind through the lantern room, and the exact moment the sun dipped below the mainland horizon. He thought he knew everything about the lighthouse. He was wrong. It began in October. The month of fog rolled in, thick as wool and tasting of salt and something ancient. Something rotting deep beneath the trenches of the Gulf of Maine. The trouble started with a sound. Pause for 3 seconds of silence. Elias was in the watchroom, polishing the vast brass mechanism of the Fresnel lens. It was midnight. The rhythmic work-lick of the clockwork turning the light was comforting. Then, underneath the work-lick, Elias heard something else. Scratch. Tap. Tap. It came from outside. From the balcony that encircled the glass room, 100 feet above the churning black water. Elias froze. It couldn't be a bird. They didn't tap like that, and it was too cold for migratory birds this high. He walked to the heavy glass door and looked out. The fog was so dense, the beam of the light barely penetrated 10 feet. He saw nothing but swirling white mist. Tap, tap, scritch. It sounded like long, brittle fingernails dragging across the glass. Elias reasoned it was a loose piece of storm shutter, agitated by the wind. He unlocked the door and stepped out onto the iron grate balcony. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The wind was howling, yet as he stepped outside, the tapping stopped abruptly. He leaned over the railing, peering down into the abyss. "Hello?" he shouted. His voice was instantly swallowed by the wind. He felt a sudden, prickling sensation at the back of his neck. The sensation of being watched from directly behind him. He spun around. The watchroom door was wide open, swinging slightly in the gale. The polishing rag he had left on the table was gone. Elias backed into the room, slamming the deadbolt home. He tried to rationalize it. The wind must have caught the door, and the rag must have blown away. But deep in his gut, a cold knot began to form. The next 2 weeks were a descent into madness. The lighthouse, once a sanctuary, became a prison. The sounds grew bolder. Elias began hearing footsteps on the spiral staircase below him. He would descend, shotgun in hand, the cold sweat freezing on his forehead, only to find the heavy oak door to the lower levels locked from the inside. And then, the light began to change. The new rock light was supposed to be a brilliant, steady white flash, warning ships away from the rocks. But now, in the thick of the fog, Elias saw it casting strange shadows. When the beam swung around, instead of illuminating just the mist, it seemed to illuminate things in the mist. Shapes. Tall, gaunt silhouettes that stood just beyond the light's reach, dancing on the edge of the visible world. Elias stopped sleeping. He lived on black coffee and paranoia. He checked the logs from 1902, the year the previous keeper, a man named Silas Vane, no relation, went mad and threw himself into the sea. The logs from that year were empty for the month of October. save for one repeated entry scrawled in frantic, heavy handwriting. They are hungry. They are outside the glass. Speed up slightly. Raise voice and tension and volume. The night of Halloween arrived with a storm that shook the very foundation of Needle Rock. The waves were as high as the lighthouse itself, smashing against the stone tower with the force of a wrecking ball. The air pressure dropped so low Elias' ears popped. He was in the lantern room, trimming the wick of the oil lamp. The electricity had failed hours ago. When the lens stopped turning, the work click died. The light was stuck, facing east toward the open ocean. Total darkness swallowed the tower for a second. Then the wick flared, casting a warm yellow glow. And then the tapping returned. Scratch, scratch. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't just on one pane of glass anymore. It was on all of them. The entire circle of the lantern room. Dozens of entities were circling the room, outside, 100 feet in the air. Elias couldn't help himself. He approached the glass. He brought his face close, wiping away the condensation. Paused for 5 seconds. Let the silence hang heavy and terrifying. Through the glass and the yellow light of the lantern, he saw them. They were not ghosts in the traditional sense. They were something older. They looked like drowned men, bloated and gray, their skin translucent, revealing phosphorescent bones. Their eyes were wide, black orbs, unblinking against the stinging rain. Their fingers were elongated, webbed, and tipped with the black, sharp claws that were currently tearing at the thick, reinforced glass. One of them pressed its face against the pane, right in front of Elias. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and let out a sound that Elias felt in his teeth and his bones. It wasn't a scream. It was the wet, gurgling sound of the ocean floor. Elias screamed and scrambled backward, grabbing the iron bar he used to break the eyes from the lens. The creatures outside didn't seem angry that he was armed. They looked amused. They began to press against the glass. Crayak. A spiderweb fracture appeared on the pane nearest the creature's face. A spray of seawater and cold mist shot into the room. Elias realized then what had happened to Silas Vane in 1902. He understood why the keeper had chosen the sea over the tower. The glass was bowing inward under the immense pressure of the storm, and the creatures combined. Another crack appeared, louder this time. Water flooded across the metal floor, extinguishing the lantern. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the faint, glowing, gray-green light radiating from the hundreds of eyes staring through the spiderweb glass. The creatures began to sing, a low, mournful, hypnotic keying that made Elias want to open the door. It promised peace. It promised an end to the cold and the fear. It promised the embrace of the deep. Elias dropped the iron bar. He was weeping, paralyzed by a terrifying, unnatural compulsion. He walked toward the glass. He could see his own reflection in the eyes of the drowned thing staring back at him. He reached out a trembling hand to unlock the deadbolt. Elias. The voice was not from the creatures. It was soft, female, and came from the watchroom below. Elias snapped out of his trance. That was his wife's voice. But she had died 10 years ago. The distraction was enough. The main pane of glass, weakened by the constant scratching and the pressure, finally gave way. Screamed suddenly, a genuine cry of terror, then immediately dropped to a frantic whisper. With a sound like a gunshot, the glass exploded inward. A deluge of freezing Atlantic water and dozens of screaming, cold, wedge hands flooded the lantern room. Elias didn't feel the claws. He didn't feel the cold. He only felt a crushing, absolute darkness as he was dragged out of the tower and into the abyss. Epilogue. Read slowly, eerily, almost like a eulogy. The sun rose over Needle Rock the next morning. The storm had passed, leaving a calm gray sea. The lighthouse stood silent. The great lens was still, coated in seawater and shattered glass. Down in the watchroom, the logbook lay open on the desk. The inkwell was overturned, spilling a dark pool across the page. Written in the center of the log, in handwriting that did not belong to Elias Vance, was a single new entry. The lamp is extinguished. The post is vacant. The sea reclaims its own. And far below, in the cold, dark depths, Elias Vance opened his black eyes, smiling slowly as he joined the dance in the endless, drowned dark. He ended with 5 seconds of absolute silence.